my agents and 2 interviews that we conducted.
Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
I want to conclude my testimony where I started by recognizing the courage and bravery of the extraordinary gymnasts that we heard from today and that we've heard from and that came before law enforcement in other settings. Their persistence and strength are an example to all of us who work in the area of accountability and who want to promote accountability. Although the sexual abuses by Nassar and the appallingly inadequate response by the FBI agents cannot be undone, these athletes' commitment to justice and their pursuit of accountability for all involved in this deeply tragic series of events will improve our institutions ultimately and will help ensure federal law enforcement responds in an appropriate and a timely way to reports of sexual abuse in the future. Our report recommends several important and necessary reforms. As Director Ray indicated, the FBI has begun taking them, and we will continue to conduct our independent oversight work to ensure that they're effectively implemented. Thank you, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Inspector General Horowitz, and thank you for your excellent work as usual.
Senator Dick Durbin, Committee Chair.
Director Ray, I'm trying, it had to touch you personally, as not only in your official capacity, but even just as a parent, to listen to these young women tell the stories of what they had been through. And what strikes me here is there doesn't seem to have ever been a sense of urgency or immediacy in that Indianapolis field office. The July reporting leading to the September vain attempt to change venue on the case to Lansing, which didn't happen, and then the later report in Los Angeles, and then they sat on it. What's missing? What am I missing here? This is like a child kidnapping case. This man is on the loose molesting children, and it appears that it's being lost in the paperwork of the agency.
Well, needless to say, I share your reactions. I share your bewilderment. I share your outrage. On a personal note, not just as a parent or a brother or a husband, but as somebody whose first introduction to law enforcement was working as an intern in a DA's office in a unit specifically focused on these kinds of crimes, was part of what motivated me to pursue a career in law enforcement in the first place. And I don't have a good explanation for you. It is utterly jarring to me. It is totally inconsistent with what we train our people on, totally inconsistent with what I see from the hundreds of agents who work these cases every day. And that's why that individual has been fired.
Understood. But you also heard Ms. Maroney talk about, I can't imagine this. 3 hours she's sitting on her bedroom floor going through an interview, which you can tell was by a person, whoever it was, totally insensitive to this young woman's tragic experience. What has the FBI learned from that? I mean, in terms of cases of this sensitivity, to at least have interviewers that can sense there's certain words you better be careful with.
Well, thank you for that question. It illustrates something that's particularly important that we've put in place. So we have something called CAFEs, which are Child
WCSPF from Washington.
Adolescent Forensic Interviews. These are interviewers who are specially trained in the unique sensitivities of what it takes to interview people, victims, survivors of these kinds of crimes. And one of the reforms that we've put in place is to make crystal clear in policy that interviews of individuals like Ms. Raisman should be conducted with those kinds of interviewers, and they should not be conducted telephonically. They should be conducted in person wherever possible. That was true before. We've made it more clear now, and we're putting training in place, mandatory training, which has already been completed to ensure that that occurs. So that's partial answer to your question on that one.
General Horowitz, did any of the FBI employees or agents involved in this case deliberately misrepresent any facts to you in your investigation?
They did. We found both that the person who wrote the report that Ms. Maroney testified about falsely testified to us about what he did in connection with that report. as well as other matters that we asked him about, and Special Agent in Charge Abbott made false statements to us about the steps he took in 2015 when these allegations came in, but also about his job-seeking efforts with the U.S. Olympic Committee.
Did these deliberate misrepresentations reach the level of criminal violation?
Well, we found that they violated criminal law sufficiently that what we do at that point is make the referral to prosecutors to assess them, because that's who needs to make the decision whether or not there will be charges brought.
Director Ray, what happened next?
Well, as Inspector General Horowitz said, those were referred to the prosecutors over at the Justice Department, and they're the ones that made the decision. As I understand it from Inspector General Horowitz's report, the prosecutors at the Justice Department on two separate occasions, both in 2020 and then again in 2021, declined to prosecute. But I really would defer to the Justice Department for those.
Are you personally aware, professionally aware of any facts or circumstances that would lead to that decision?
I am not.
Well, it is outrageous, and I am sorry, because I have a great faith in this Attorney General and his Department of Justice, but when we asked them to bring someone in to explain this today, they refused and said they wouldn't attend. And I understand that it's procedure in the department not to go into the basis for deciding to not to pursue prosecution, but this is on its face obvious that these agents not only were derelict in their duty when it came to these young women, but also did their best to cover up what had happened, and that is inexcusable from where I am standing. So let me ask you this finally, Director Ray. I'm going to accept your profession of real caring, and I believe it is real caring about what happened in this circumstance today. What can you tell me, if it happened tomorrow, would be different?
So there's a whole bunch of things we've done differently. First, we've accepted every single one of Inspector General Horowitz's recommendation, and then some. We've already begun implementing all of those. We are strengthening policies, we're strengthening procedures, we're strengthening training, we're strengthening our systems, all building in double checks, triple checks, safeguards, oversight, different ways of making sure that we cannot have, as occurred here in certain instances, a single point of failure. That's one of the lessons here. That's just totally unacceptable. And so part of what's built in is a bunch of, as I said, double and triple, even quadruple checks to make sure that that doesn't happen, both in terms of how the initial reports are handled, the appropriate urgency there, but also in terms of communication. One of the important recommendations from Inspector General Horowitz is reporting to state and local law enforcement, as well as communications between field offices, transfers between field offices. And I can go into more detail about any of those, but those are part of it. And then the last thing I would say is that there are some things that occurred here that are just so basic and so fundamental and so foreclosed by our policies. As Inspector General Horowitz said, we have pretty clear policies on a lot of these things. And so I have tried to make clear in very stern language to not just the field offices involved here, but to the executive management of every single field office and the entire leadership team of the FBI, that on no planet is what happened in this case acceptable.
FBI Director Christopher Wray, questioned by Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin.
Quick question. It seems that a lot of the decisions were being pinned on whether or not there was an alleged violation of the sex tourism statute. Why is that such an exclusive remedy that if you're not on all fours with that, in fact, the FBI agent felt that they were constrained to do anything?
Well, I'm not steeped in the particulars of the sex tourism statute in the way that I used to be, but what I would say is that one of the things that we've tried, both the Deputy Director and I, to make clear to people is that we don't want people getting wrapped around the axle about federal jurisdiction issues at the front end. Part of what needs to happen, while they're figuring that out in consultation with the prosecutors, which is what should happen, they need to make sure that they're reporting to state and local law enforcement on a parallel track. So that's one of the key takeaways that comes out of Inspector General Horowitz's report.
Thank you, Senator Grassley.
Yeah, please give me a minute before the clock starts to ask unanimous consent to include in the record letters that I have sent over the last few years that show the non-responsiveness of the FBI to our inquiries on this subject.
Without objection.
And then second one would be a little bit unrelated to this, but it deals with the unresponsiveness of Director Ray in regard to, so I hope the committee will listen to this as well. I've asked Director Ray several times to meet with me relating to a very troubling briefing that I received August 2020 from the FBI, and which was later weaponized against my and Senator Johnson's oversight. Director Ray and his staff have ignored my request to meet, mimicking the pattern here at the Nassar case non-responsiveness. So without objection, I'd like to introduce into the record of the hearing today an email thread illustrating the FBI's non-responsiveness to my request. This email shows the great length that I went to getting a meeting with Director Ray. Okay. Now my question to Director Ray. The Inspector General's report shows that J. Abbott, a senior official in the Indianapolis field office at FBI, was allowed to retire in 2018 and evade prosecution, even though this report describes significant misconduct by him and an agent under his supervision. I've asked that the Attorney General reconsider the decision not to file charges against some of the individuals involved in the case, and I'd like you to provide this committee with a list of all disciplinary actions that took place with respect to FBI personnel who were the subject of this investigation. I believe that you owe that, at the very least, to the victims of today's hearing.
Well, we can provide the committee with whatever information we can. Certainly, as I've already testified here today, the special agent, the supervisory special agent who features so prominently in Inspector General Horowitz's report, I can confirm has been terminated. As to the former special agent in charge, he retired before this review commenced, before we learned the extent of his misconduct, much to my frustration. And as to the decision whether or not to prosecute either individual, I would respectfully refer over to the Justice Department, which I think is where Senator Grassley, you said your letter was appropriately directed.
I'd like you to cooperate in ensuring that the prosecution of those individuals who failed these victims, and give us your commitment that you would go to the Justice Department again to try to get that done.
Well, I'm happy to do whatever would be appropriate. In this particular case, the criminal investigation that was conducted, the case agents, as it were from Inspector General Horowitz's office, which I think is as appropriate. So that's really a discussion between his office and the Justice Department. But if I can be a constructive part of that, given how strongly I feel, as I hope the committee can tell, I'm happy to do whatever I can that would be appropriate.
Next question. Why didn't the children's unit at headquarters play a greater supervisory or coordination role here? For example, by ensuring that the correct office at FBI handled this matter, and why didn't it follow up to ensure that the Indianapolis office had referred the matter to an FBI office that had jurisdiction over these allegations?
Well, I want to be careful not to try to paraphrase too much Inspector General Horowitz's report, since he's really the master of the facts here. But as I understand it, among the things that happened here were that the Indianapolis folks most responsible concealed information from certain people at headquarters at different stages of. That's part of the problem. We have implemented changes now that go to the point that you're getting at, which is the transfers between field offices. We've built in a number of additional checks, and one of those 3 or 4 additional checks that we've built in now gives headquarters